Namaste. The bow of me and you. Hopefully not to each other in any appropriate way or something, but the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, translated by James Haughton Woods. The comment explains itself by mere reading. Posture is also described in the Vishnu Purana 6.789, having assumed a posture so as to possess the excellence of the decent posture and the other postures. Because, it's not that you assume a posture for hours, or that you bounce back. It's that you're able to assume poses symbolically enough to relax, say mantra, and move on to the next posture. 49. When there is this stability of posture, the restraint of breath, cutting off, the flow of inspiration and expiration follows. After the mastery of posture follows the restraint of the breath. Inspiration is the sipping in of the outer wind. Expiration is the expulsion of the abdominal wind. Restraint of the breath is the cutting off of the flow of these two, the absence of both kinds. After describing postures, he shows that these precede restraint of the breath and tells the distinguishing characteristics of this restraint of the breath. 49. When there is this, the restraint of the breath, cutting off the flow of inspiration and expiration. In the case of emission, Rachaka, and inhalation, Puraka, and suspension, Kumbhaka, the words, the cutting off of the flow of inspiration and expiration, give the general characteristic of restraint of the breath to explain when inhalation, the outer wind, sipped in and is held inside, there is a break in the flow of inspiration and expiration. Again, when an emission, the abdominal wind, forced out, is held outside, there is also a break in the flow of the inspiration and expiration. Similarly, in the case of suspension also. The same is said by the comment and the words, after the subjugation of posture. But this restraint of breath is 50. External or internal are suppressed in the fluctuation and is regulated in place, in time, and number, and is protracted and subtle. It is external in case there is no flow of breath after expiration. It is internal in case there is no flow of breath after inspiration. It is, the third, are suppressed in fluctuation in case there is no flow of either kind, neither of expiration nor inspiration. As a result of a single effort to suppress both, just as water dropped upon a very hot stone shrivels up wherever it falls, so both at once cease to be, and each of these three is regulated in space. Each deals with a certain amount of space. Each is regulated in time, in other words, defined by a limitation to a certain number of moments. Each is regulated in number, for the first rising up of the vital current from the navel to the palate is measured by so many inspirations and expirations. In the same manner, the second rising up of the checked vital current is measured by so many inspirations and expirations. Likewise, the third, similarly it is gentle and method, similarly it is moderate, similarly it is keen. Thus it is regulated by number. So then, practiced in these ways, it becomes protracted and subtle. He introduces the sutra, which gives the characteristics of the three particular restraints of the breath by saying, but this. The sutra begins with the word external and ends with the word subtle. The words in fluctuation. Okay, what is the With any parentheses that are reading? No, there weren't parentheses. The words in fluctuation are connected with each of the three. He refers to emission, or chakka, when he says, in case expiration. He refers to the suspension, kumbhaka, when he says the third. He refers to inhalation when he says, in case paraka, when he says, in the case inspiration. This same he makes clear when he says, in case of either kind, when by only one effort of retention there results in abstinence of both inspiration and expiration, and when there is not, as before, an effort to prolong a long stream of efforts of emission, but on the other hand, just as water thrown upon a very hot stone dries altogether and shrivels up wherever it falls, so this wind, whose nature it is to flow, when its action is restricted by a mighty effort of retention, becomes stabilized and remains in the body. Suspension does not inhale, and so is not inhalation, does not emit, and so is not emission. Well, we know the air is processed. It doesn't just move back and forth in us. The words deal with a certain amount of space. Means as measured by a span, the space between the outstretched tips of the thumb and the forefinger, by a bataste, from the extended thumb to the tip of the little finger, are by hand, and it is inferred to be external insofar as it causes motion in a blade of grass or a piece of cotton in a windless spot. Similarly, if internal, it begins at the sole of the foot and extends to the head, and is inferred by an internal touch, as that of an ant moving on the body. A movement is 1/4 of the time required for the act of winking. The wind is defined by a limitation of a certain number of these moments. An instant matra is at the time limited by the snapping of the thumb and the forefinger after having 3 times rubbed one's own knee pan with the hand. The first rising up, measured by 36 such instances, is called slow. Oh, it's interesting. You look at the genome types. What, you have 36 in Australia? 36 of the native Australians? Only 6 in Africa? That implies something, doesn't it? And what? Like 1 for all of Western Europe and 3 for Asia. 1 for the other part of Europe. Okay, what is it? 1 for the Middle East. Okay. The same udgata, when doubled, is moderate. The same tripled, called the third, is keen. The same restraint of the breath he describes as being regulated by number in the words by number. The time for snapping thumb and forefinger as described is equal to the time defined by the action of inhalation and exhalation of a man in good health. The rising up, which has been made the object of the action of the first rising up, is conquered and mastered and checked. It is intended by these measures of instance to indicate the time of a certain number of moments, and this time is equal to a certain number of inspiration and expirations. Then there is a slight difference between the 2 kinds of measures, between the matra and the inspirations and expirations. This same restraint of breath, when practiced day by day, increasing gradually, by a day at a time, or by a fortnight, or by a month, becomes, insofar as it is made to cover an increasing number of places or of times, protracted, and insofar as it is reached by a concentration of the most extreme delicacy, it is said to be subtle, but not so far as it is weak. Rumbling and the tumbling again, right? 51. The fourth restraint of breath transcends the external and the internal object. The external object, regulated in place and time and number, is transcended. The internal object, regulated in the same way, is transcended. In both kinds of cases, restraint is protected and subtle. Following after these, there is no flow of either kind. There is the fourth restraint of breath. Now the third restraint of breath is without regard to objects, has no flow of breath, is begun once only, is regulated in place and time and number, and is protracted and subtle. But the fourth, because in consequence of its mastery of the stages in order, it has made out the objects of both expiration and inspiration, after transcending both external and internal objects, is without flow, and is the fourth restraint of breath. This is the distinction. Thus the three particular restraints of breath have been characterized. The fourth he characterizes with the words, the fourth transcends the external and the internal object. The comment explains the sutra in the words, place and time and number. Transcended means cast down, because its form has been mastered by practice. It has also been protected and subtle. Similarly, following after these means the restraint of breath, which has external and internal objects, and which follows after knowledge of place and time and number. The fourth does not, like the third, arise by a single effort and instantly, but while in practice and after having reached the various stages according as it succeeds in one stage after another, it proceeds, as he says, in consequence of its mastery of the stages. It is objected, in the repressed fluctuation, also there is no flow of either. What then is its distinction from this fourth? In reply, he says the third. The third does not follow after any regard paid to objects, and is complicated by a single effort. But the fourth preceded by the regard paid to objects, and has to be completed by many efforts. This is the distinction. The object of these two, the inhalation and emission, is not considered, but this object is considered in respect of place and time and number. This is the meaning. So if there's not exhalation, inhalation, holding, I guess fourth, still holding, 52. As a result of this, the covering of the light dwindles away. In the case of the yogin who is practicing restraints of breath, the karma capable of covering discriminative thinking dwindles away. What is this, they tell us in the words, having covered the sattva, which is supposed delight, with delusion, indrajala, made of infatuation, undifferentiated consciousness, assigns the same obscured form to deeds which are not to be done. Therefore, by practicing restraint of breath, his karma, which covers the light, together with its bondage to round of rebirth, becomes powerless, and for the moment to moment it dwindles away. In this case, it has been said, there is no self-castigation higher than restraint of breath, for it comes purity from the defilement and the clear shinings of thought. So when you're doing your horizons and meditations and all the other stuff, control of breath is one of the key techniques. But don't look at life as some sort of sedentary thing. Oh, if I allow myself to be more active, I'm going to be more sinful, and so therefore, it doesn't have to be. Work on living an active life full of obvious deeds. I was able to stay still a lot. He describes the subsidiary purpose served by restraint and breath. 52. As a result of this, the covering of the light dwindles away. The covering is that by which the sattva of the thinking substance is covered, in other words, hindrances and evil. He explains the sutra in the words, restraints of breath, thinking jnana, that is that by which anything is thought. It is the light of the sattva of the thinking substance. Discriminative thinking is the thinking of discrimination. For this hindrance, since it covers discriminative thinking, is called the coverer. Avaraniya. Accordingly, the Sutra of Patanjali 3.4.68, which says that bhavya and gaya and pravachaniya and similar forms have been shown to be used as exceptional forms in the sense of agent, just as, for instance, the words kapanya and ranjanya. So here also the affix of the future passive participle is used to denote the agent. The word karma connotes the merit which results from it, and the hindrance which is the cause of it. On this same point, he states that there is a concurrence of opinion with those who have the tradition, agamen, in the words, "What is this?" they tell. Extreme infatuation is passion, undifferentiated consciousness, avidya too, which is inseparable from it, is also to be understood by this word. A deed not to be done is wrong living. An objector asks, if restraint of the breath causes evil to dwindle, what need is there of self-castigation? In reply to this, he says, becomes powerless. It does not dwindle away entirely. Therefore, to make it dwindle away altogether, self-castigation is needed. On this point, he states that there is a concurrence of opinion with those who have the tradition, agamen, and by saying in this, since it has been said, Manu also, 672, says, by restraint of breath, one should burn up defects, and that restraint of breath is also an aid to yoga, and is stated by the Vishnu Purana, 6, 7, 40 to 41. But restraint of breath, which masters by practice the wind, called breath, is to be recognized as being seated and seatless. When the two winds, breath, prana, and outbreath, apana, have overcome each other, and that is twofold. The third is the result of a subdual of these two. Furthermore, and one of the things that we should remember is like Ramadan doesn't defeat the demons per se. It's said to be a break from them, and one needs to work on it when having that break. And the breath thing can be analogous to that. That's okay, you're breaking from this, but you're working on something else at the time. 53. For fixed attentions, also the central organ becomes fit. Merely in consequence of practice and restraint of breath, the central organ becomes fit for fixed attentions, in accordance with the statement 134. Or he gains stability by expulsion and retention of breath. Furthermore, 53. For fixed attentions, also the central organ becomes fit. For restraint of breath steadies the central organ and makes it fit for fixed attentions. Now, what is the withdrawal of the senses? 54. The withdrawal of the senses, as it were, the imitation of the mind stuff itself, on the part of the organs by disjoining themselves from their objects, when there is no conjunction with their own objects, the organs, in imitation of the mind stuff, as it is in itself, becomes, as it were, restricted. When the mind stuff is restricted, like the mind stuff, they become restricted, and do not, like the subjugation of the senses, require any further aid. Just as when the king bee flies up, the bees fly up after him, and when he settles down, they settle down after him. The queen bee, yeah, it's the queen bee. So when the mind stuff is restricted, the organs are restricted. This then is the withdrawal of the senses. The yogin, being refined in this way by means of absentations and other aids, begins, for the sake of attaining constraint, and withdrawal of the senses. In order now, the sutra giving its distinguishing characteristics, he asks the question, now? The sutra begins with the words, 54, themselves, and ends with the words, withdrawal of the senses. The mind stuff, also, is not in contact with the various kinds of things, sounds, and so forth, which bring infatuation and attachment and anger. And because it is not in contact with them, the eye and the other organs are not in contact. This is what is called the imitation of the mind stuff by the senses. Because as the mind stuff settles down upon an entity, the organs of this mind stuff cannot be said to imitate the mind. since their object is always external. Therefore, he says, in imitation, as it were, in compound beginning with the word their own, sva, he shows by the locative case in the word abhava the reason why the mind stuff is imitated, because of the property common to the mind stuff and to the organs, namely the disjunction from their own object of sense. He elaborates the meaning of the imitation by saying, when the mind stuff is restricted, the similarity is that effort which causes the restriction of both is similar. Here he gives a simile by saying, just as when the king bee, the queen bee, he applies the simile to the thing illustrated by saying so. On this point also, he quotes a sentence from the Vishnu Purana 6.7.43. A man skilled in yoga, having restrained the organs attached to various things, sound and so forth, should make them imitate the mind stuff, and that he is intent upon the withdrawal of the senses. And the motive for this is shown in the same place, 6.7.44. In the case of men who have become motionless, the result of that withdrawal is perfect mastery of the organs. A yogin with unmastered organs cannot accomplish yoga. You can stretch and breathe, but you can't, you can't attain to really what yoga is if you're not going through the system. But anyways, 55. As a result of this withdrawal, there is complete mastery of the organs. There are some who think that the mastery of the organs is a lack of desire for the various things, sounds, and so forth. Longing, vyasana, is attachment to the sense that it puts him a long way from the vya asyate, a good. Others think that unforbidden experience is legitimate. Others that may be conjunction of the organs and the various things, sounds, and so forth as one desires. Others think that there is a subjugation of the senses when there is no passion or aversion, after the thinking of the various things is without pleasure or pain. Jagi Savya thinks that it is a refusal to perceive the various things, beginning with sound, as a result of the mind stuff's singleness of intent, and as a result of this, when the yogin's mind stuff is restricted, the organs are restricted, and there is not, in the case of the subjugation of the other organs, any further need of means performed with effort, but this mastery, which is the singleness of intent, is the complete mastery. The sutra is explanatory of this mastery. As a result of this, there is complete mastery of the organs. An objector asks, are there other and incomplete masteries in comparison with which this may be called complete? Undoubtedly, he says in reply, he shows what these are in the words, various things beginning with sound. He elaborates the same by saying desire. Desire is passionless attachment, according to what derivation? It is that which rejects him or throws him away from a good. When there is none of this, there is absence of desire. In other words, mastery. 2. He describes yet another incomplete mastery in the words unforbidden. That devotion to things which is not forbidden by sacred word and other authorities, and the absence of sense activity with regard to those things which are forbidden by these. Such is legitimate because it does not depart from the law. Now, you want to take a wholesome approach, and truly, if a God was to have a law for our time, there would be a scripture that we would that would refer to some sort of guidance for everything. We don't have to wait for another substance or another material culture to pop along and, this isn't explained. It's like, no, it's already explained. 3. He describes yet another incomplete mastery in the words, contact the senses with the various things, beginning with sound, contact the organs with various things, sounds, and so forth, as one desires. The meaning is that with regard to the matters of enjoyment, he is independent and not dependent on enjoyment. It's interesting how you can tend to enjoy life more when life is not about the pursuit of happiness, as one would call it in this country. 4. He describes yet another incomplete mastery in the words, no passion and no hatred. Some say that it is thinking without pleasure or pain of the various things, sounds, and so forth by a detached observer. Well, I would say it's more about, it's not about your own taste, it's about you love and hate for the sake of God. I mean, you don't have to hate beings, but... 5. It describes that mastery which is approved by the author of the sutras and is also approved by the supreme sage, as he says, as a result of the mind-stuffed singleness of intent. Jaegi Savya says that when the mind stuff, together with the organs, is single in intent, there is no sense activity with regard to various things, beginning with sound. The commentator says that this is complete mastery in the words, but the complete. The word but distinguishes it from other masteries, for other masteries insofar as they are in contact with the poisonous snake, a chivisa of objects of sense, visaya, do not escape the possibility of contact with the poison of the hindrances, for even a man who knows the lore of poisons, and who is a perfect master of serpents, does not take a serpent on his lap and quietly go to sleep. Well, they might, but... this mastery, on the other hand, from which all intermixture with objects has been removed, since in it there is no distrust, is called complete, and he says not as in the case of the subjugation of the other organs, also in the case of the consciousness of endeavor. 2:15. Book 2:15 of this, we're at 2:55. When one organ is subdued, there is still need of another effort to conquer the other organs, yet when the mind stuff is restricted, there is no need of further exertion in order to restrict the other senses. This is the meaning. We're not starting book 2 just yet. Here in this book, he is taught the yoga of action and the hindrances to karma and the fruition of karma, the painfulness of these karmas, and also 4 divisions, a group of 5 subjects pertaining to yoga. Remember, karma is cause, effect, action, what is done. Let's not moralize the term and, karma, you're going to get rid of your karma because karma is bad. No. A Patanjali's Yoga Treatise, the second book, titled Specification of the Means of Attainment, of the explanation of the comment on Patanjali's Yoga Treatise, whose explanation is called Clarification of the Entities, Tattva Vaicharadi, and which was composed by the Venerable Vachaspati-mitra. The second book, called Specification of the Means of Attachment, is finished. And the third book, Supernormal Powers. So we are mostly through with this, but the fourth book looks like it's the third and fourth book are going to be smaller than what we've already gone over, but namaste. We are back